Okay, so one of the things that I found most interesting about the introduction and the first, the chapter 53 about the lost cause and the cause is not lost was it goes over the idea of rewriting the history books and who who do we pick and choose to write these history books and how do we measure how accurate or inaccurate they are. And the lost cause and cause is not lost, it goes over it. Um, they want to show a history from the southern perspective, I guess. That they're saying that no library should be without approved Southern histories and all of Thomas Nelson Page's books, which basically describes how the North didn't go to war over the noble cause of slavery. They went to war because of the secession to the South, and they used slavery as a means for war to try and get the South to come back into it. I just thought it was interesting how you always see it as the perspective of the North coming and trying to free slaves and things like that, but in a Southern perspective, they saw it as exercising their rights as individual states to secede from a union that they didn't agree with. Also, another interesting thing that I picked up on was on page 533, Morton notices that when it came to commemorating war, Southerners seemed to have more passion and more fun. I think it's very interesting to see how you had the North and the South. The North obviously won, but he says that when he went to a march commemorating Union soldiers, that everyone was silent, there was no celebrating. But in the South, even to this day, they're in the streets when the Confederate soldiers walk by in their uniforms, shouting and cheering and applauding. It's just interesting to see how they celebrate a war that they lost. But I guess they're celebrating the idea more of the war that they fought for, and like the old South, they fought for a system that worked for them, and I guess they're applauding their troops and soldiers because even though they didn't win the war, their idea still exists. They can't kill the idea of the perfect South and the ideal South. I also think it's interesting to compare the two articles, the one on the Confederate War and the one on the Vietnam War, about how the wars are remembered. Like I said before, in the Confederacy, they celebrate when they see Confederate soldiers go by, and they still celebrate to this day. But the U.S. lost the Vietnam War, but you don't see parades and celebrations like you do for the Confederate Wars. It's interesting to see how different it is when the war is between the nation itself and when it's between two different nations. I guess the Civil War kind of shows the split in the nations, but when it comes to a nation as a whole going to war, it doesn't matter. We supersede the bond or supersede the racism and things like that for a better cause. And I think that ties in with the memorial not being in alphabetical order, about how it's in chronological order, because if they mentioned that if they put it in alphabetical order, racial names would end up being associated with each other. You'd have sections of the walls that had mostly Chinese names or mostly African American names. And I just thought it was interesting to show how the United States, since the Civil War, which was over 100 years before the Vietnam War, how they have come together to overcome these things, especially right after the Civil Rights Movement. We've come together as a nation to, fight a common goal and to fight a common terror to all of us, and it supersedes any of those boundaries. And one question I just want to ask is, specifically towards the Lost Cause and Cause is Not Lost article, is how do they still, the feelings of a Confederate South still exist today?